When it comes to gimbals, there is a plethora of options out there now. So many you can pick from. I haven't used every gimbal, but I have used a lot of them, and I thought it'd be a good idea to put that knowledge, that experience into one easy to follow video covering 3 different categories, so like a small, medium, and large gimbal. Which one should you go for? My choices, if you will. I'm not saying these are the best ones out there, but from my experience, these are the ones that are the simplest to use, have good features, and get you good video quality, which is ultimately what you want. If there's a gimbal out there that I haven't talked about, it doesn't mean that it's not good, it just means I haven't used it, so I can't comment on it. So the 3 categories that I want to delve into are the small, travel-friendly gimbal, perfect for cameras like the Sony RX series, your phone, and maybe small mirrorless setups too. And then a middle-of-the-road option with something like an A7 III, not on a grip, not in a cage, with say a 24mm G Master or a similar lens. So I've got a couple of options for that one for you. And then a big, heavy setup which will pretty much carry anything you can throw at it. So A7 III with a big old cage, nice big rig, 7200, something that can carry all that. Now a quick note, I'm not going to be touching too much on the actual video performance of all these gimbals today because I think we've reached like peak gimbal era, where any gimbal that's coming out nowadays, you don't really have the jerkiness, you don't have the jitteriness that we had a couple of years ago, so they're all really good. And if I was to show you video quality from all of these, it's gonna look really similar. So there's not much point doing that. They all give you really good video results, and if we use something like this, which counters your up and down movement, you can get even better results. And we'll talk more about this later on, but I don't want that in the shot. Can you, there we go, gone. All right, let's get on with the video. Now the first category I want to cover is the small, compact, travel-friendly gimbal. And there's really only one option that comes to mind out of all the ones I've tried, and that is the Xeon Crane M2. This is a tiny gimbal, and if you want to carry something like your phone, this is an 11 Pro Max, it handles that completely fine. Sony RX series is going to work just fine in that as well. And even something like the Sony a6400, which I'm shooting with right now, and the 30mm Sigma f1.4, it does balance on it. Even though it's technically over the weight, it does balance and it works great. Now, if you want to use the Sony kit lens that comes with the a6400, that is also a lens that balances really well on that. And I quite like using that because you can zoom in. It's got the little electronic zoom on that. In terms of what I like about the M2, what's not to like really, it's really well built. It's tiny. It has the locks on all the axes, so you can lock it off and it doesn't jangle about there when you're traveling around with it. It has a 1/4" thread on there, so you can mount whatever you want. You're not gonna put a monitor on there, but for something like a mic, an external mic, or even a light, that's gonna be a good thing that you can just screw in there and have attached to the gimbal, obviously, because you can't put it on the gimbal because it probably wouldn't balance. Has the joystick and the trigger on there, so if you want to take full manual control with the joystick, you can do so. Has the trigger on there as well for resetting to whatever mode you were in. You can just go back to your regular mode. One of my favorite features is you can go from landscape to vertical mode just by turning it. You don't actually have to take it off, rebalance it, move it around. It literally just can be turned and then you're going to go from vertical to landscape mode. In terms of negatives, there's really only one that I can think of, and that's the fact that you can't really balance anything too intense. So a6400 with a 30mm Sigma is pretty much the limit, so you can't go much above that. But I guess being such a small gimbal and having small motors, then you can't really ask too much. The only other negative would be that it's a proprietary plate that is on the bottom, so it does actually attach to the gimbal and screws in. So if you want to use the camera with something else, you have to unscrew the plate and then screw it back on before you use it with the gimbal. But that's really it, to be honest. So the Xeon Crane M2 is my choice when it comes to a small pocket travel-friendly gimbal. Next up is what I consider to be a middle option. So it's not crazy heavy, but it's also way heavier than what the Crane M2 would support. So something like the a7 III with a 24mm G Master or a similar weighted lens. The important thing with this category of gimbal is you don't really have a grip on there, you don't really have a cage on there, it doesn't raise up the camera too much. With the 2 gimbals I'm going to show you here, and yeah, I've got 2 for this category, 2 that I like. If you raise them too much, the center of gravity comes a little bit too high, and then it's really hard / impossible to actually balance these. So this is for setups pretty much like what I've got going on right here. So for this category, I have 2 different gimbals to show you, one from Moza and the other from Feiyutech. The first is the Moza Aircross 2, and actually comes in white now. I have talked about this gimbal before in black, but it does come in white now as well. This can support up to 7 pounds, but as I've mentioned before, that weight threshold is entirely dependent on your setup. So if you put it too high, your center of gravity just goes off and you can't really balance it. Some things that I like about the Aircross 2, you'll notice straight away here, I actually have it turned off, but it has the locks on all the axes there. All gimbals should have this as a standard feature now. It just makes it much easier when it comes to traveling if you want to throw it in and out of bag. All the axes aren't locking or knocking together and scratching it. To touch on that, they actually put these little rubber things on here, which allow you to, basically, if you don't have it locked and they do rub against each other, it's not going to scratch the gimbal. So if you're concerned with how your gimbal looks and from it getting scratched, they help protect it. This actually has a removable battery too, so you can just pop the battery straight out there. This charges through USB-C directly on the battery there, so you can just plug straight into that. It doesn't go into the gimbal to charge. That also means if you want to pick up another battery and have a couple, then you can just take one out, put the other one in, much like a camera, if you need to. Some people really like the RGB LED on the side there. That does actually change color depending on the mode that you're in or the settings. So that's a feature, and you can turn down the brightness if you want to. And that's how you turn it on as well there, that little button just there. Now I do like the knob in that you can use it to control the axes. So if you want to have it set to control your pan axes or your tilt axes or whatever, it just gives you a bit more finer control over the gimbal when you're using it. This gimbal actually has a little bit of a different design in that the part that removes from the gimbal is its own L bracket there. So this just slides directly into the gimbal, like so, and then you just tighten that up. Problem with that is there's no easy way to take the camera off and then put it back in without having to rebalance it. So what I end up doing is putting my own plate on, and then I can just pop it on and off like that. That little plate doesn't add a ton of height, so I don't really have any issues with balancing it. It still balances just fine. Only dislike I have with this is, and I think it pertains a little bit more to the white than the black, I'm not a huge fan of the white. It's a little bit plasticky for my liking, but if you really like that white look, this might be a good option for you. I would say it's more like a pearlescent silvery white. I don't know if pearlescent is the right way to do it. It's definitely a nice white. I kind of like things to look black opposed to the white there. Just my personal opinion. But this is a really good option for a middle of the road gimbal for carrying a setup just like this. My other option for the middle of the road gimbal would be the Feotech AK2000S. This one actually supports 6 pounds, but again, that weight is dependent entirely on your setup. Put it too high and you'll find it's a nightmare to balance / impossible to balance. I actually quite like the design in this one. If you look up close there, you see it's got like proper wooden inserts on the handle, and they are actually made of wood, and then they're screwed directly into the gimbal. And that adds a nice little feature. This feels cold right now. I'm in my basement, but it feels cold, but the wood part here, that it feels pretty warm still. So I do like the design there. It gives it that classic, almost like when you put a wooden grip on your camera. Gives it that look, and it's quite nice. This is a little bit different when it comes to the actual design and how you control it. With the Moza Aircross 2 there, it's buttons and that's how you control it. This is a touch screen, which you can see just there. So you touch, and that is what controls the gimbal to select your different modes. It also comes in the box with this handle, which I quite like. Great for shooting with underslung mode, and if you want to go two-handed, if you've got really weak arms like me, then that's a good option for you to have as well there. So it does come with that in the box, and I quite like that. This handle actually attaches with 1 Allen key bolt on that side and then 2 on this side. So it is on there tough, and it feels solid, like it's actually just one part of the gimbal. But you can take that off if you don't want it. Obviously, with that being on there, it doesn't fit in a bag that easy. You take that off and it's a lot easier just to slide into the side of your bag or where you'd normally put a tripod. So you don't have to use that. I like to, it does come with it. My choice is to use that. It just makes it easier to carry. This gimbal also has your knob on the side there, so you can control your axes. You can see right now I have it set to move like that. So just minute adjustments. So let's say you want to move forwards and slowly pan down, or pan up, tilt up even, sorry, not pan. Then you can do that by assigning that knob to essentially control whichever axis you want it to control. Something else I like about this one, again, it has the locks on there. So see, right now everything's flopping around. If we engage all the locks on there, and where's this one? Right there. It now doesn't move around. Those locks just stop the axes from moving. Again, should be a feature on all gimbals now, but I like that this one has that on there too. Something I do really like with this gimbal, and unless you use the same plates as me, which is Arca Swiss, then you're not going to enjoy this, but the actual gimbal uses that style of plate, and I have L brackets on all my cameras, so I can literally take one camera off, put a different one on. Yes, you do have to balance it every time just for your axes going this way, because it can be slightly off, but there is numbers on there as well. So if you just remember the number that you're at, you're good to go. The negative, I would say, with the Feiyutech AK2000, the battery is built in. There is no removable battery of any form. So if you want to charge it, you just charge it directly into the gimbal, which is fine. If you're using it for a long period of time or you don't bring your charger with you and it dies, you're screwed until you can recharge it again. So that's something to be aware of. Probably the biggest negative of this. If they could just add a rechargeable battery that you can remove, that would be a really good thing to have. Like the Mo's Aircross too. And then finally, what I'd consider to be the heavy duty option. So you need to put something insane on a gimbal, you need it to balance. And for that, I use the DJI Ronin S, and this is the Essentials kit, which comes in at $539. You can buy it with the focus wheel, which comes with the cables and an extra or a better grip for the bottom there, and I believe that one's like 200 more, $749 US. But for me, the Essentials kit is all I need. Now, the reason that I like the DJI Ronin S and I choose to pick this one, even though it's so heavy, is because it's simple and just works. It feels the most high quality out of all the gimbals I've talked about today. Of all the gimbals I've ever tested, it feels the most high quality, and it's very straightforward. You've got 3 modes on there, 1, 2, and 3, which you can assign in an app. To change between them, you push the M button, that changes your mode. You got a record button there if you've got it set to the camera or connected to the camera, and then an on-off switch and your joystick, and that's it. It's very straightforward. It's a prime example of a gimbal that doesn't have all the fancy bells and whistles and features that some of the other ones I've talked about today and a bunch of other gimbals have, but it still is the one that I end up picking. It's still the one that a lot of other people end up picking, and it's just because it's simple, easy to use, and it works really well. The joystick on this thing feels really tactile. It sticks out a lot. It reminds me very much of the DJI Mavic Pro joysticks. In actual fact, yeah, it's almost the same joystick. I don't know if you can see there. You probably can't. I can't get it close enough one-handed. I've got a bad shoulder and I can't lift it with that arm anyway. But the joysticks are very similar to the Mavic Pro ones there. Just works really nicely, and it's completely customizable in terms of how sensitive it can be, and it just works the best of all the joysticks on all the gimbals that I've used. Because there are times when you do need to do manual control, you do need to manually control the gimbal yourself, and just having a good, solid, high quality joystick really does help. Things to be aware of: it is incredibly heavy. It's a massive setup. It definitely looks professional if you're out using it, if you need to have that look for whatever reason, but do be aware that it is very heavy compared to any other gimbal that I've used. Now, it doesn't have the locks on it, which all the other gimbals do. That's the one thing I'd really like to see them implement on a newer version, which means I end up using these little bendy ties to hold the axes together. I'll link these down below. These are really useful for so many different things. Bendy ties. So when I need performance, I need quality, I need something I can rely on without having to worry about it in any way, shape, or form, the Ronin S is my choice for heavy setups. You stay there. And then finally, let's talk about a product that I got sent that solves a lot of issues that gimbals seem to have. It's not a big issue, but when people are first starting out or they're not doing the ninja walk where you're moving on your toes there, you get a lot of movement up and down. Gimbals do a pretty good job overall of smoothing out most of your movement, but the up and down movement it can't do because there is no axes to smooth that out. So that's where this guy comes into play, and this is the Digital Photo DH04 Pro, photo with an F. And essentially it just smooths out the up and down motion that gimbals tend to have. Even if you want to do the ninja walk, you sometimes get it a little bit, but this smooths that out. You see how I'm moving there and the camera isn't actually moving? So the gimbal's doing a really good job of controlling all of my regular movements, but if I was, say, running, you see how that's actually getting rid of all that? So this is a really solid product for when it comes to smoothing that out, and it's completely adjustable. It has springs in it which you can change out. It comes with 3 different sets of springs depending on how heavy your setup is. This is a really heavy setup and I'm using the middle spring, and you can tighten the springs depending on how tight you need them to be, obviously depending on how heavy your setup is. But overall, I'm really impressed with actually how this works. When I first got it out and I looked at it, I didn't understand really what was going on because I was holding it, I was like, that's gonna be really, really bouncy. But that's not happening when you're walking. It's kind of like little movements, really. And then if you really wanna run, you see what I mean? It does a pretty good job. So this is the DH04, and I'll put a link down below if you are interested in that. Especially with real heavy setups, having that two-handed grip, you've probably seen people before, they have the the big, I don't even know what that is, it's like a frame. I think you can get it with a DJI Ronin M. And having 2 handles as well just makes things a lot easier to fly the gimbal with. And it looks cooler too. Plus, you can get rid of that motion from doing this. See, that's a pretty good product. I'm out of breath now. All right, so that is the DH04. Link down below if you're interested. That's it really. Wanted to cover 3 different categories of gimbals. If you're new to gimbals, you're looking at picking up a gimbal, you're not too sure, these are all good options for you. These are what I consider the best for each category. Okay, I'm still out of breath, so let's end the video here. Appreciate you watching. Hopefully you got something out of today's video. Let me know down below what your gimbal of choice is, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See you later. In terms of negatives, there's